Clearly, you don't care about the Fifth Amendment right to due process, and you don't care about the First Amendment either, since you've been very busy snatching students off of college campuses for exercising their right to free speech. Our nation has seen times like this before, especially during the Red Scare and Palmer raids. Like the McCarthy-era witch hunts of the 1950s, your campaign of fear and repression is eating away at foundational values of our democracy. Back then, it took one voice, Attorney Joseph Welch, to cut through the hysteria with the simple question that marked the beginning of the end of that shameful era. He asked Senator McCarthy, "Have you no sense of decency?" And I would ask you the same, Secretary Rubio. But you have shown through your words and your actions what the answer is. And I have to tell you directly and personally that I regret voting for you for Secretary of State.
Let's break this down. Marco Rubio's trajectory from unanimous Senate confirmation to becoming one of the most heavily criticized members of Donald Trump's administration reveals a significant shift in perception and accountability. When he was nominated as Secretary of State, Rubio garnered strong bipartisan support. Senators from both parties saw him as a seasoned legislator, experienced in foreign policy through his work on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. His confirmation was swift and without dissent, reflecting a rare moment of unity in an increasingly divided political landscape. Rubio's appointment was seen as a stabilizing force in what many anticipated would be a volatile administration. However, that initial optimism quickly eroded. Just months into his tenure, Rubio became the focus of pointed criticism from some of the very senators who had endorsed him. What changed was not only the circumstances of global affairs, but also Rubio's perceived failure to rise to the moral and strategic challenges those situations demanded. Nowhere was this more evident than in his handling, or lack thereof, of the humanitarian catastrophe unfolding in Gaza. As the crisis escalated in Gaza, with widespread reports of starvation, blocked aid, and thousands of civilian casualties, many within the international community, including world leaders, humanitarian organizations, and faith figures, called for urgent intervention. Yet, Rubio remained conspicuously silent. His failure to publicly and forcefully demand that Israel allow humanitarian aid into Gaza was not just seen as diplomatic timidity, but as complicity in human suffering. While other leaders pressed Israel to open the borders and allow food and medical supplies to reach civilians, Rubio avoided the public conversation altogether. This silence was interpreted by many as a betrayal of the moral leadership expected from a U.S. Secretary of State. One senator even compared Rubio's inaction to the McCarthy-era witch hunts, saying that this administration's campaign of repression echoed some of the darkest periods in American history. This senator, once a strong supporter of Rubio, openly declared regret for voting to confirm him, stating that Rubio's actions and words showed a disregard for fundamental democratic values. The depth of this rebuke underscored just how far Rubio had fallen in the eyes of those who once trusted him to lead with principle. The symbolic weight of Rubio's confirmation contrasted sharply with the reality of his record in office. For many, his appointment had been a moment of hope, that a well-known and articulate voice in foreign policy would bring balance, logic, and humanity to the decisions of the Trump administration. That expectation was not met. Instead of charting a bold course in defense of human rights, Rubio appeared to align himself with the administration's most controversial policies, either through active support or passive indifference. Rubio's critics point not only to his silence on Gaza, but to a broader pattern of failing to challenge decisions that contradict American values. From reports of student activists being detained for expressing dissent to the alleged misuse of taxpayer funds for questionable foreign programs, Rubio is seen as having abandoned the very ideals he once claimed to champion. The growing sense of disillusionment is not just political. It's personal for some senators who feel deceived by a man they once believed had the courage and moral clarity to make tough, ethical decisions on the world stage. This turn of events raises profound questions about accountability in public office. How can someone with a reputation for principled leadership change so dramatically once given power? Was Rubio always aligned with these policies, or did he compromise his values for political convenience? These are the questions being asked not only in the Senate chambers, but also by citizens watching events unfold from afar. For a public that often feels disconnected from the decisions made in Washington, Rubio's case is a stark reminder that those decisions carry real consequences for the hungry, the oppressed, and the silenced. In politics, reputations can rise and fall rapidly, but what's striking in Rubio's case is how swiftly and deeply the tide has turned. From unanimous support to open regret, from hope to condemnation, his fall from grace highlights the risks of placing trust in titles over actions. It underscores that leadership is not defined by confirmation hearings, but by choices made in the face of crisis. And in the eyes of many, Rubio has failed to make the right ones.
But these are taxpayer dollars going to El Salvador for the purpose of taking people off the streets of the United States in violation of their constitutional due process rights and locking them up in notorious prisons. So these are American taxpayer dollars going to prevent people who reside in the United States from getting their Fifth Amendment due process rights recognized. So this is an outrageous scheme. We think it is an illegal expenditure. And we're also going to be, holding the government of El Salvador accountable. But for God's sakes, right now, we just need for the Trump administration to obey the 9-0 Supreme Court ruling to facilitate his return, since they've already admitted he was wrongfully deported.
The issue of U.S. taxpayer dollars allegedly funding the detention of migrants in El Salvadoran prisons has sparked a firestorm of controversy, raising serious legal and moral questions, according to multiple reports and statements from U.S. lawmakers. More than $6 million in public funds have been used to support a program that involves transferring individuals, many of whom were residing in the United States, into the custody of the Salvadoran government. The core concern is that this program is being carried out without due process, violating the constitutional rights of those affected, particularly their Fifth Amendment protections. Critics argue that this arrangement effectively outsources the detention of people who were either seeking asylum, residing as undocumented immigrants, or in some cases, were legal residents or individuals with pending legal protections in the U.S. These individuals were reportedly sent to prisons in El Salvador known for their harsh, and in many instances, inhumane conditions. What is particularly alarming to human rights advocates is that these transfers are happening under the banner of security cooperation between the two nations, all while sidestepping the judicial safeguards that the U.S. Constitution mandates. Senators and human rights experts have condemned the policy not just as cruel, but as illegal. They point to the fact that these actions are funded by American taxpayers, making citizens indirectly complicit in what they describe as a violation of international human rights standards. The fact that the U.S. government is actively paying to detain people overseas without proper trials or legal representation has set off alarms among civil rights organizations and legal scholars alike. It is unprecedented in scale and method, and represents a sharp departure from what many consider to be the legal norms of democratic governance. The Salvadoran government, led by President Nayib Bukele, has boasted about its prison infrastructure, even as it faces international criticism for mass detentions and a deteriorating human rights record. Bukele, who once labeled himself the world's coolest dictator, has shown little concern for the backlash, focusing instead on projecting strength and control. By funding this regime's prison system, critics say the U.S. is enabling authoritarian behavior and legitimizing a government that openly defies democratic norms. In one particularly troubling case, a deported individual named Abrigo Garcia was later found to have been wrongfully deported. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled unanimously that he should be returned, yet the administration continued to delay that process. This has intensified the scrutiny on the program and deepened the belief that it may not just be a legal misstep, but a deliberate strategy to circumvent U.S. law. Ultimately, the use of American funds for foreign imprisonment raises questions about transparency, legality, and accountability. Who approves these expenditures? Who monitors the conditions in which these individuals are held? And perhaps most importantly, why is the U.S. government investing in the incarceration of people abroad instead of upholding their legal rights at home. These are questions that demand answers, and until they are given, the controversy will only grow louder. The allegations that the Trump administration, under Secretary of State Marco Rubio's oversight, targeted and detained college students for expressing their political views have sparked widespread concern over First Amendment violations. These claims, if accurate, point to an alarming trend of silencing dissent and curbing free speech, especially on university campuses, which have traditionally served as bastions of open debate, protest, and political activism. Reports suggest that students were apprehended for writing op-eds, participating in peaceful demonstrations, or voicing criticism of the administration's foreign and domestic policies. These actions were met not with dialogue or civil rebuttal, but with arrests and punitive consequences. Senators critical of the administration have spoken out publicly, condemning the use of state power to suppress speech, particularly among young people. In one Senate hearing, Secretary Rubio was confronted directly, accused of snatching students off college campuses simply for exercising their right to free expression. The implication is that the government, instead of protecting constitutional freedoms, was using its authority to intimidate and punish those who dared to challenge it. The First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution guarantees the right to free speech, peaceful assembly, and expression of opinions without government interference. When college students, many of whom are engaging in politics for the first time, are targeted for expressing dissent, it undermines the very principles upon which the country was founded. More disturbingly, such targeting fosters a culture of fear and self-censorship. Students who see their peers arrested or punished for speaking out are less likely to raise their voices, even when they witness injustice or feel morally compelled to act. What makes these accusations particularly troubling is the context in which they allegedly occurred. This wasn't an isolated incident or a misinterpretation of university policy. It was, according to critics, part of a broader campaign by the administration to silence opposition, especially among young, progressive voices that were vocal in their criticism of U.S. policy in Gaza, immigration enforcement, and civil rights. By criminalizing student activism, the administration set a dangerous precedent, one that chills public discourse and undermines democratic participation. Universities have historically played a vital role in shaping political movements and cultural shifts. From the civil rights era to the anti-war protests of the 1960s, student activism has driven major societal change. When government institutions treat such activism as a threat, they not only violate individual rights, but erode the spirit of civic engagement. Critics argue that Rubio, as Secretary of State, failed to speak out against or stop these tactics, and instead allowed them to become part of the administration's broader approach to dissent. The long-term implications of this strategy are deeply concerning. A generation of young Americans may come to see political participation as risky or futile, especially if the cost is surveillance, detention, or permanent records that follow them into their careers. The right to challenge authority, to question policy, and to speak truth to power must be protected, not punished, and when that right is denied, democracy itself is weakened. The refusal of the Trump administration to comply with a unanimous Supreme Court ruling in the case of Abrigo Garcia has raised profound concerns about the rule of law, constitutional integrity, and executive overreach. Garcia, who had been deported from the United States, was later found to have been wrongfully removed. The Supreme Court, in a rare 9-0 decision, ruled that he should be allowed to return. This kind of unanimous decision from the highest court in the land typically carries enormous legal and moral weight, signaling that there is no ambiguity about the rights being violated or the actions that must be taken. Yet, the administration has stalled, invoking the State Secrets Act as a reason for its non-compliance, a move that has drawn criticism from judges, lawmakers, and legal experts alike. By hiding behind the State Secrets Act, the administration claims it cannot provide full information about the case, citing national security concerns. However, the federal district court judge overseeing the matter has rejected this justification, stating that the reasoning fails even the basic test of credibility. The judge noted that the administration's explanations do not meet legal standards and appear to be more about obstruction than genuine security concerns. This has led many to believe that the administration is not merely resisting on legal grounds, but is actively defying the Supreme Court's authority. The implications of such defiance are serious and far-reaching. At the heart of this issue is the Fifth Amendment, which guarantees that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Garcia's deportation, carried out without proper legal procedure, was a clear violation of this right. The Supreme Court's ruling was not only a directive to correct that mistake, but also a reaffirmation of the principle that even the government must obey the Constitution. When the executive branch refuses to comply, it sends a dangerous message that constitutional rights are conditional and that court rulings can be ignored when politically inconvenient. This case also carries symbolic significance. It raises the question, if the federal government can ignore a unanimous Supreme Court ruling in a high-profile case, what other constitutional protections are at risk? Critics argue that the administration's behavior sets a precedent that could be used to undermine other rights in the future. It erodes trust in the judicial system and creates a chilling effect for individuals seeking justice through the courts, especially those from vulnerable communities. In a democratic society, the separation of powers is fundamental. The judiciary exists as a check on executive power, ensuring that no president or administration can act above the law. By disregarding the court's decision, the Trump administration, under Rubio's foreign policy watch, has not only violated an individual's rights, but also attacked the very framework that holds the republic together. This case serves as a warning that constitutional safeguards must be actively defended, not just assumed. Otherwise, the promise of justice for all becomes an empty phrase, easily ignored by those in power.